And I think that's the DNA of our church. That's who we want to be. I tell people all the time, what makes the Orchard unique in my mind is not the style, not the preaching, not any of that stuff. It's the people, right? And we talk about that a lot, is because we want our people to be mission-minded. We want our people to be mission-minded on Sundays, realizing that today is probably somebody's first Sunday. And am I going to be the person who just kind of goes and talks to all my friends and we huddle up around, the coffee table or whatever? Or am I going to be mission-minded and think, hey, one Sunday was my first Sunday and I remember that person who came up and engaged me. We want our people to be mission-minded on Sunday. We want our people to be mission-minded Monday through Saturday. And I think you see that in some of the articles here. This is really the story of the Orchard, but the story of the Orchard is people.
Welcome to Let's Talk About That, the podcast where we dive into conversations about life and share stories of faith. We're thrilled to be on this journey with you. Whether you're a longtime listener, someone who calls the Orchard home, or you're just stopping by, Let's Talk About That is your space to explore, reflect, and connect. Join us as we navigate the intricacies of faith, spiritual formation, and daily life as we invite guests to share their stories with us. So grab a cup of coffee, find a comfortable space, and let's do this together. This is Let's Talk About That, where you can be encouraged and inspired by God's work in our lives.
Well, we are back with Let's Talk About That. We are back home in the office, even though I really enjoyed the conversation that we had at Orange with all the volunteers debriefing. Matt, you missed it, but when Erin was called a Gen Xer by Haley, I thought she was going to lose it. It was absolutely phenomenal. Peak moment in Chip's long journey of convincing people that she was older than me.
Was she offended by that?
A little bit.
Okay. I mean, truth hurts, right?
Oh, yeah.
According to how you interpret her laughter, because she actually laughed, but...
it was a shock, offended laugh.
Maybe just like the light bulb going off? I don't know.
I don't know. But we also decided that Eddie is not a boomer. He is our boomer.
Yeah,
that was
the only thing that I did not care for in the podcast as we were doing it is that it was happening at like 10:30 at night again.
That was a lot better than our Bold podcast.
It was better, yes, and at least I had a soft bed to go to afterwards, and so that helped.
But, yeah. So if you missed that podcast, you really should go back and listen to it. And one of the things that I think is worth mentioning, if you haven't listened to it, or if you have, is we often talk about shallowness or like shallowness of faith in the next generation. But like immediately when we have some of our Gen Z young ladies jump in, they jump into the deep end about things that they're wrestling with and how their faith impacts that.
Of course, we don't really have notes for this podcast. We're just kind of shooting off the hip at this subject. But it's funny because when you were saying that, my thought was, once again, the Gen Zers stole the show.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was good. So go back and listen to it if you haven't. This episode, if you haven't already picked up on it, I'm here. We have Matt here. We have Eddie here. And that is our 3 current location pastors that are here at the Orchard, because I'm filling in for our Lake City location right now. And we're sitting around the table this morning, sipping on some coffee, talking about Impact Tomorrow. If you've been around the Orchard at all since a little before Easter, you've heard about Impact Tomorrow. I think we've talked about it every week. It came out of a sermon series that we ended last or 2 years ago, I think maybe with, and really it kind of culminated, got brought to a head of something very physical, tangible, put our hands on, look through it, when on Palm Sunday, we got to release the first edition of our Impact Tomorrow book. And that was exciting, at least for me.
Is it a book?
Well, that's the debate, isn't it? Like, we've called it a magazine, we've called it a booklet. I lobbied for pictorial, and Jules said that we are never going to call it a pictorial again.
Well, it's hard to call it something, and then you have to explain what it is. So I think, I'm not sure. Maybe that's a Gen X thing, was pictorials back in my childhood.
I'm a millennial.
I looked at pictorials. I don't know.
I'm a millennial, Matt. You know what it is to me? What the book is, the magazine is, it's just vision on wheels. It's what it is. It's vision that you can hold, because it's a story of who we have been, who we are, who we want to be, what God has done, where we're headed. It's been phenomenal. And really, it was a secret project for a while. So, Eddie, you and Matt, you guys didn't know about this. The only people that knew about this originally were me and Michael and Chris and Jules. And then we brought in Aaron and Mary Beth to help, because obviously nothing can happen at the church unless Aaron and Mary Beth help with it. But it was a secret. And so I'm interested, what were your first reactions when we were able to bring you into the office before we walked into a meeting to start giving this out with some key leaders? You guys were the first two to get your hands on it. So, what was your immediate reaction like when you got it?
Do you want to just know my honest gut reaction?
Honest.
My honest gut reaction was a sigh of relief, because all I could think about was, we talked about this in November, and I feel like I should be saying something about this on Sundays, but I don't know what to say. And so I was like, that tension inside of me, maybe there's a secret distrust that I need to go and repent of. Though honestly, it was just a sigh of relief, because it was like, hey, this is something that I was really excited about in November. When we talked about it, it's our vision series. If you've never been to the Orchard in November, then it's somewhat memorable, because it goes against kind of our number one rule, and that's always in-person communication.
Yeah.
It's the time where you show up and there's a large 6-foot chip.
Whoa. Yeah.
Sorry,
I'm glad you went
chip.
with 6 foot, not just large.
There's a larger than life chip on the screen. We video in, but I tell our location specifically this November, I remember saying, I know this isn't everyone's preference, including ours, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not our preference, but it is so important that we all get to hear the same message at the same time from Chip, because as the lead pastor, this is your time throughout the year. I think a lot of people, they joke, hey, you just work on Sundays kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I can't speak to being lead pastor. I know, Eddie, you can speak to that a little bit, but the amount of mental space that is consumed with forward thinking, or calendaring, or thinking about next year, or all of that kind of thing, it's something to get excited about, because we know that this didn't just originate in October. Yeah. This is something that's been marinating. This is something that's been in the crock pot, so to speak, and it's a slow cook or a simmer, and then here it all gets to come to life. And so I was really excited about it in November when I saw the booklet magazine pictorial thing that we released.
We're going to go with book. We're going to go with book from now on.
All right. When I saw the book, though, it honestly was a sigh of relief, somewhat joking of like, whew, it's back again.
We didn't forget about it.
Yes, but
yeah, really, no, we get that, because, full transparency, we're on the podcast. Our hope was to be able to release it kind of the end of January, early February, and then never having done something like this before, we were quickly corrected in our thinking, wow, this is a lot more work than we thought it would be, but then immediately it's still worth it. Let's keep pushing.
So can I tell you my second thought, though? My second thought, and it speaks to that, is as I began to flip through the pages, I thought wow, this is incredibly well done. And so to speak to that,
yeah, shout out Chris and Jules with that.
Absolutely. The Curtises, I've talked about them some in Live Oak. You've probably seen them at different locations, but just a phenomenal job. And to your point, I think it's something that we need to understand, and maybe this is a microcosm of church ministry as a whole, impacting tomorrow as a whole. I'm sure there's a way that it could have been done by January, the end of January, but the overall product would have not been near what it ended up being, right? Because some things take time. Sometimes it takes longer than anticipated. Sometimes it looks maybe a little different than I initially thought. And yet at the end, we look back and we say, wow, this is better than I could have imagined, right? And so I think, yes, it probably could have been done sooner, but the fact that it took longer, but this is the product that you got, I think just speaks to the quality, but also the heart and the vision of hey, we want to nail this. We really want to be crystal clear on who we want to be as a church, where we came from, where we are, but really who we want to be. And I think, yes, Chris and Jules nailed it. I think the content inside of it, I think you guys nailed it. So, I'm appreciative of all the work. And even if it took a little bit longer, I'm thankful, because I think really and truly you guys nailed it.
Yeah, and that's all shout out to the Curtises. I wrote some articles. I helped with the planning of it. This was primarily the Curtises and Michael. and, Jules and Chris, layouts, pictures, interviews for articles. They really put a ton of time into it, and I do think it was worth it. So, Eddie, you may even have a little bit different perspective when you look at this magazine, book, because it really, especially in this first, edition, tells the story of like who we are and where we've come from. And in many ways, that has to be a little surreal for you because you were the one who saw all of this happen before any of this happened. And now you get to look back on it in, paper and ink, hold it in your hands form. So what's that like?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it stirred different emotions in me at different pages, different places in the book. I will say magazine is okay with us boomers. We know what a magazine is. So it's something that looks really a whole lot like this book that I'm holding right now. But anyway, yeah, I think so. I think that, of course, if you know me, the first thing I did is went through the whole book and looked at the pictures. I mean,
I think that is what everybody did. As a matter of fact, Michael had some people tell him, I flipped through the pictures to see if I was in any of them, and then I put them up. Michael said, that's not a yearbook. That's what you do with your yearbook.
Yeah, well, I did look through the pictures, and like Matt has already said, I just ditto that, Curtis has did a great job with the pictures, with just the layout. The whole layout was easy for me to look at. I'm not one that's going to take up a journal and read it, anxiously. But the pictures invited you into the story, which I think is really good. And simply the layout even of the thing is good. I really think, Chip, and really go back to the point of your question, I've said before, even on this podcast at one point, that I heard someone say that an elderly man say that the 70s was one of maybe his best decade to live because he was able to see the harvest of many of the seeds that were planted earlier in life. And that kind of made sense to me. And I think that's one of the things that's really been enjoyable about our time here at the Orchard the last few months, particularly maybe even the last couple of years, is like getting to see actually come to fruition, bearing fruit of seeds planted early on.
Yeah, because all you had was seed and soil when you got started.
Yeah, and dreams. Yeah, and dreams, but seeing those dreams become reality, I think is good, which is why the early pages, there's a history of the Orchard there. And I don't know.
Yeah, the timeline.
Yeah, the timeline. I think at first when I saw it, I thought, man, this is really good. I really enjoyed this. I don't know if everybody else will. But I've heard lots of comments about it and positive comments about the timeline. And frankly, I think that might be something that I will use to help me with next steps classes when we get together for lunch, because we talk a little bit about the historical timeline, but we try not to do it too much. I think that's a good synopsis, and so I really enjoyed that. And then, seeing the ones from the past and the ones from the present, of course, personally, I've thoroughly enjoyed the articles on Trey and Carter.
Well, I wanted to touch on those because I think that was maybe a favorite of a lot of people who were looking at that, because unless you were here early, and even if you were here early, you might not have known any of that. And then to fast forward and see Carter in West Africa, to see Trey leading a region in FCA ministry here in North Central Florida, like that is the DNA of the Orchard.
Yeah, I do. And before I really say that too much, I want to say that the beauty of this, the way that this book is put together to me, is you do have Trey and Carter from the early years of the Orchard. And then you've got an article here, a story here about Brittany and her business and how she's impacting her community through her business. And Brittany has not been with us at the Orchard too terribly long. What, Matt? A couple of years?
Probably 3.5.
3.5 years. And so I think the blending of the old and the new is really something good. But to your point, yes, I think seeing that fruit with Carter and Trey is really a good thing. I don't want to get too personal, but if you don't mind, I'll absolutely take a moment to say this. The thing is, one of the things I recall about the process of surrendering to church planting is I remember sitting in my office and doing some administrative work, which both of you guys know is not my favorite thing to do. I do it because it's necessary. But I was dreaming of this new church, this new plant, and my thought was, if I could just go impact a handful of young men, that was really what I was thinking at that time. If I could, I was kind of past the growing the big church, kind of past, being, in this dynamic pulpit or something. It was really in my heart, if I could just go someplace wherever God directed and find a few young men and impact their life, that would be really, I feel like a fulfillment of purpose. And so now, years later, when and it wasn't like I intentionally started looking for guys. It was more like the Lord just brought people before me. And then you get to see guys like Trey and Carter, and many others, by the way. There's so many others that you guys have impacted that, it was a pretty special thing. And I will treasure those articles for sure.
Yeah, it was fun, putting some of that stuff together. And, in many ways, Michael and I and the Curtises, selecting some of the people that we wanted to highlight and things like that because it was so secretive. I'm looking forward to how much we can expand that in the coming editions, now that all of us are in the loop, looking to add more folks into that. But Matt, what about you? What was some of your, favorite flipping through the book? What was some of your favorite parts of it?
The thing that immediately stood out, like Eddie, I flipped through. I think that's just natural. You flip through and you get lost in the pictures. What stood out to me, though, as I flipped through the pictures was, number one, that these are people just like you. That's immediately what stood out to me. And I told the Live Oak location that when we first launched it, is when you flip through this, you're going to see faces of people that are just like you. And I think that's the DNA of our church. That's who we want to be. I tell people all the time, what makes the Orchard unique in my mind is not the style, not the preaching, not any of that stuff. It's the people, right? And we talk about that a lot, is because we want our people to be mission-minded. We want our people to be mission-minded on Sundays, realizing that today is probably somebody's first Sunday. And am I going to be the person who just kind of goes and talks to all my friends and we huddle up around, the coffee table or whatever? Or am I going to be mission-minded and think, hey, one Sunday was my first Sunday, and I remember that person who came up and engaged me, that person who came up and shook my hand and talked to me and invited me, was helpful and pointing me where to go and all that stuff. And so we want our people to be mission-minded on Sunday. We want our people to be mission-minded Monday through Saturday. And I think you see that in some of the articles here. But what stood out to me is, like, you could replace a lot of these pictures with a number of people from any of our 3 locations.
Yeah, for sure.
And that could be true, right? Because this is really the story of the Orchard, but the story of the Orchard is people.
Yeah, and there's so many more stories to tell.
Exactly. This is a small representation, and I'm excited that we're going to continue this project so that we can tell more of those stories. But the idea, if you're listening to this and you call the Orchard home, the idea is, like, this is who we want to be as a church. It's not about who's on the stage. It's not about who's leading. It's not about the person with the microphone. It's about us equipping the saints, giving you guys and you girls the tools in your tool belt to go and to live and follow Jesus anywhere that you find yourself, so that you can be mission-minded at work. You can be mission-minded wherever you recreate and you have hobbies and you do those things. It's simply following Jesus. And I don't want to oversimplify this because this can be hard. It's hard to live out. But at the end of the day, it's simply following Jesus. And as pastors, we're trying to empower you and equip you to be able to do that wherever you find yourself.
That's right.
And that's why we're doing the series that we're in on a digital world, right? the point is we want to equip you to be a follower of Jesus in an online world.
How do we become salt and light in our communities?
Right.
And that's what you're seeing in the book.
Yeah, and so that's just immediately what stood out to me was I flipped through the pages, number one, and I'm like, man, this is really well done. I see faces before I ever read anything. I see the faces, and immediately I have thoughts.
Yeah, I love that you see the faces. The visual side of it is so important to me because it is a story. These are real stories. This isn't an illustration in the middle of a sermon. These are the real stories of real people that go to church with you.
Exactly. And one of the things that stood out even in the pictures with like Trey or Brittany or Carter, it's the idea that, hey, they're not just all gathered at our location and you can recognize the stage in the background or whatever. This is their own habitat, so to speak. They're in their own environment because this is where they live life. I mean, think about from a time standpoint. Most people, right, on average are at church for an hour on a Sunday, right? Maybe an hour and a half if you get there early, stay late, whatever. And that's not even every Sunday because you have vacations and whatever else comes up. How much time do you spend outside of the church? Where you spend most of your time is not at the church. And so I love that it tells their story and it shows that like, hey, this is who I am as a person, right? My identity is not just who I am on Sunday. No, my identity is I follow Jesus, and that goes wherever I go. The second thing I thought is just seeing really the differences in our locations. I thought that stood out.
Yeah, I think you could pick up on some of that.
I mean, the reality, I've been to Branford, I've been to Lake City, but I don't get to see those places operate on a Sunday, and so getting to see the pictures was kind of cool for me as, what I see most Sundays is I see Live Oak and I kind of, I know how things function, and so you miss some of the details, right? And then I'm looking at pictures from Branford or Lake City, and I'm like, oh, I never realized that's kind of what that looked like in my head, on a Sunday morning. So not a profound thing, but I think it was cool because you see what we say all the time. We're one church in many locations. We are one church. We have, similar styles and songs and everything else that we go to at our locations, and yet all of our locations are different, and that's by design. Because Branford's a different community than Live Oak. Live Oak's a different community than Lake City. And so in a very subtle way, I think it also shows the heart of our church is we want to be in many locations because we feel like that's the best way to reach individual communities.
And we want to have the freedom to contextualize in those locations. Like we're one church with one shared DNA, but the contextualization does look different.
I think it's a visualization in the addition here that we talk about a lot. We often say that what you see on Sunday is, if all you see is Sunday, you've missed a lot of what the Bible is about. I think that's what this has to say. I think clearly you see in
that's a really good point. You see that here.
Yeah. People have told me that. They said, I've heard you say if Sunday's all you see, then you've only seen a part of the orchard. Said, now I understand what you're talking about. I didn't know all of this was happening.
I haven't really connected that with that statement that we do say a lot, but 100%, that's right. 100%.
I'll say a cool story. So I was actually in Inside Out, which is Brittany's tea shop, nutrition club. And so if you read the article, that's where it was. But I was in there the other day, and I saw a lady, and I recognized her from Sunday mornings. And so I had talked to her, just kind of exchanging pleasantries and things, and started talking about kids camp because I saw that her kids were signed up for camp. And what was cool to me was she talked about, hey, we're going to be, at our river house or somewhere down in that area. And so she was asking questions about Branford and basically saying like, hey, we're going to go to Branford because we're going to be down that way. And the thought struck me, was like, that's exactly what we want, is because
that's good.
It's like, and I was telling her, I was like, you're going to get pretty much the same thing in Branford, and that's by design, but it's also going to be different because they have the freedom to be different and contextual. And so it was just cool because there you go, kind of this intersection of all of these things, at Brittany's place, and just strike up conversation. But it was cool because instead of going and thinking, oh, I have to miss Sunday because we have something planned or whatever, it's no, I can just go and experience the same church in a different location with maybe a few things that are different.
Yeah.
So
same thing, just different flavor.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's almost like, coffee's coffee.
Yeah.
But there are different hints and flavors and subtleties in coffee. Now, I'm not talking about when you get into the weird, like, flavored coffee. I'm talking about donut shop versus breakfast blend versus Colombian.
All right, let's digress for just a second. We ask people all the time, what flavor are you? Like, that's our personality question in our NFL combine interviews. So as a church, maybe we could say that we are like coffee, where you can expect similar but maybe a little different, but we are not like a Chinese restaurant. Because what I love about Chinese restaurant
you got to back up just for a second.
So when I was in college playing baseball, when we go on a road trip, 3-game road trip, they would give you per diem, and usually we would stay next to a mall because it was just, hey, you have the freedom to walk there and we don't have to arrange transportation, all that stuff. What I remember about being on the road in college, when we stayed next to a mall, every time I ate, you know where I went? The Chinese restaurant in the mall. The Chinese restaurant in the mall. Do you know why?
No.
It does not matter what city you're in. It does not matter what mall you stay next to. Every Chinese restaurant in every mall, you know exactly what you're going to get.
You know?
I don't care what the title is.
You know, Matt is so logical in his thinking.
He is. He knows that no matter what Chinese restaurant he eats in the mall, he's going to get an upset stomach.
I knew I was going to get the same thing everywhere I went. If it was bourbon chicken, I don't care the name of the restaurant. I don't care who cooked it. It tastes the same everywhere you go. And I look forward to that. But as a church, that's not what we're saying. We're not an exact replica everywhere that we are. We're more like the coffee shop where, you know, you're going to be able to taste the similarity, but there may be a hint of our own little, you know, spice change.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think, you know, we have all, and I know if you're listening to this, the chances of you having actually read this are pretty small, but we've all read the book Multi-Church that describes different types of multi-site churches. And there is the model that is a satellite, which is you have a main campus and then you beam out to all the other ones that kind of orbit around it. That's not us. You have a franchise model where the goal is to make every location be the same, just kind of like that Chinese thing you're talking about. I think that might have been us at one time, but that's not us anymore. We are what they would describe as a federation model of churches. We belong to the same body. We have the same DNA. We have the same mission. We have shared leadership and shared budget, but the contextualization of each does look different. And you do get to pick up on some of that in the book. I think that's really
well, really, to borrow your phrase, Chip, we are growing up. And, you know, as you grow up, things change. And, you know, when we were young and experimenting really with multi-site, learning multi-site, it was like, yeah, we needed to have everything exactly the same, like a McDonald's. You know, you go into McDonald's, you get everything exactly the same.
And in fairness, that's what was being taught back then.
Yeah, exactly. But as we have grown a little bit and matured a little bit, we begin to see, as Matt already alluded to, that we need to be contextual because these communities we're in are not the same.
No.
Even though we're 20 minutes away from each other, 25, we're very different. Live Oak, Branford, and Lake City.
Unity does not equal uniformity.
Yes.
You know, and I think going back to live preaching, and maybe this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but people often ask, why don't we use video preaching at the Orchard? And in fairness, that's not really people who come to the Orchard. That's other pastors or churches that we talk to. And Eddie, you and I have said that we don't have any theological hangups with video preaching. And we're not saying there wouldn't ever be a day when we intentionally start some type of video mini campus location, whatever. But I think I'll speak for myself. My heart behind live communicators in the small rural communities of North Central Florida that we are reaching is that the primary relational connecting point that people expect to have when they come into church is with the pastor. And in fairness, even in video locations, that is a location pastor that you can build that with. However, because of where we are and when we are, that does not connect unless you're the guy preaching the message, at least most of the time. That, you know, we've always said that people will put up with whatever music that you play because, let's be honest, there's a lot of guys who are just good old country boys who sit in our church and they just sit there and tolerate the music because it's not Morgan Wallen, right? They tolerate the music, but they're there because they connect with the pastor. And I think for me, that's why having a live pastor of that location, not a steward of that location, but a live pastor of that location is so important to me.
Yeah, I don't think that was a I don't think that was a theological decision at all. I think it was much more of a contextual decision because really, if you put the pros and cons, if you list them side by side, it makes much more sense to have video preaching. It's easier, it's cheaper, it's go down the list. But I think you nailed it. In our setting, in our context, I think people still connect who's up there speaking with the role of pastor. And now we could probably bridge that gap, but
yeah. I know we're off because we're not really, this is not an ecclesiological podcast, but I do think contextually, right, is if you live in a large metro area, then face-to-face communication probably is lower on your totem pole.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the idea. But when you're talking about North Central Florida, like, people are used to knowing everybody in town.
Yeah,
right?
well,
Like, there's a very human component to that. And so, again, contextually, there's a lot of churches that do video and they do it well at it, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times it's just what works in your area. And that's exactly what we mean by contextualization is the gospel never changes. The Bible never changes. What is the most effective way to reach the people around you in that community? That's really all that it is. And for us, and I wasn't even involved in these decisions, but for us, I mean, it just makes sense because we still live in a place that values face-to-face human interaction, and we have the opportunity to be able to do that live and in person.
Well, maybe one day we can even dive deeper into that because I do have some additional thoughts. But I'll get us back on track and share one of my unexpected favorite parts of the book was seeing all of our mission partners listed on paper and then being able to highlight the Moroscos and what they do and tell a little bit of their story. Because we don't talk about that often, like who we partner with, who we support in mission.
We don't have time, really. Like,
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, on a Sunday morning, especially with 2 services, I mean, trust me, people in Live Oak understand that it gets tight if you go over 70 minutes.
When you preach 47 minutes.
So, 100%. Which we try not to make a habit of, but yeah, I mean, you just don't have time to highlight everything. And that's what I do. I agree. I love the book because it gives us this, you know, in the freedom of your own time at your house, whatever, you get to kind of see that there's a lot that happens in the background that you don't always have time to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's shift gears a little bit.
So can I make one comment before we leave?
Go ahead.
Because I was going to say this earlier, that one of the things that to me about the book that was impactful, and I'm going to give a little shout out to Michael here. I know that's a dangerous thing to do, but
Michael needs a shout out.
Let me give you a little shout out because to his credit, Michael has said to us, Chip, you know this from your time here, and Matt, even the time you've been here, Michael is always telling us that we need to do a better job of letting people know what's going on. You know,
Michael has been the advocate for guys. We got to do a better job of telling stories.
Exactly, and we always say, we agree, and then we don't do anything. To me, this is a beautiful way. One of my first thoughts is this is the best job we've ever done at saying, okay, here's what's going on at your church that you support. The money that you put in that offering plate, is going toward these things, and the things you hear us talk about. So, and to Matt's point, we don't have to spend time. If we took the time to tell these stories every Sunday, we'd have no time. So I think that was a beautiful job.
I'll go even a step further. I don't think it's the best job that we've ever done telling those stories and highlighting those things. It may be one of the best jobs any church has ever done of telling those stories. But I mean, really, like I believe that the quality that they were able to put out in this is just phenomenal, and it holds up anywhere you go. That said, Impact Tomorrow is not just a book. That's what we're calling the book, and there's going to be an edition, hopefully twice a year, that we're able to release. But that's just to kind of give legs to Impact Tomorrow. It's not Impact Tomorrow. What Impact Tomorrow is for our church, it is an engagement initiative. That's how we're talking about it with our staff. It's an engagement initiative. We want our people who attend the Orchard, who call the Orchard home, to engage with the church and with the mission in a way that they haven't before to make an impact on their communities, on lostness, and in doing those things today, impact the tomorrow that their kids and their kids' kids are going to inherit. And so when we talk about impact tomorrow, it's not just about the book. It's about, and Eddie, you're the one who brought it up, what really, gave birth to this idea is it's about us as a church growing up a little bit.
Yeah, the engagement initiative, I think it goes back to what Eddie said in the very beginning. The book just gives handles to what has always been, right? The opportunity to do all of these things has always been, and it has been at the Orchard, and it has been in different parts of the world. It has been, ever since Jesus walked the earth, right? There's opportunity to minister. The book just gives handles, and I think, similar to like a round table type discussion where you sit around with people and you talk and you chat and you discuss ideas, sometimes just seeing it or reading it sparks something inside of you, right? It gets the creative juices going. Or you see somebody that's just like you and you think, I could do that. And it sparks this thing inside of you that says, you know what, if this person can do this in their community or at their job or, when in their hobbies or circles or whatever, then why can't I? And the engagement part of this is simply saying, to me, it's like rolling out all of these options and saying, where do you fit in?
Yeah, and I think we're, at times I feel like it's just me, but then I begin to realize, a lot of people are extremely visual. And I can hear things, I can hear people talk about things. I can hear people tell a summary of a story. But when I see it, it just comes more to life for me. That's why I've always advocated Holy Land travel, because when I see the land, I understand more. And
the connections are different.
The connections are different. And I think what this does is helps us to see the stories that we knew. I knew, for instance, about Brittany's business, and I knew Brittany. But when I saw the pictures and when I read the story that was that the pictures invited, I had a whole new perspective, a whole different idea. So I think, that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, I think so go back to Trey, right? I've known Trey for a while. I knew that he was the FCA regional director.
Yeah, sounds good. Go with it.
He always corrects me when I'm wrong. But one of the cool things when I was flipping through this is I knew Trey. I played baseball against Trey in high school, right? So I knew Trey for...
Did Trey ever take you yard?
He did not, and whatever he says about hitting a double or something, that's false too.
That's where I was going.
Did Trey ever take anybody yard?
Oh.
Trey, don't listen to this podcast.
Oh.
I actually watched Trey play and cheered him on. So yes.
No, the cool thing for me though was I know that about Trey now. Flipping through some of the old pictures of Trey, like doing ministry at the Orchard, to me that encapsulates Impact Tomorrow. He was impacting tomorrow then, that's now the present. Yeah. And so for us, when we talk about Impact Tomorrow, Trey was doing things 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago, before he was the FCA guy, right? He was doing things then to pour into and to invest in students and to serve here at the church. And that's what Impacting Tomorrow looks like. He probably didn't envision 8 years ago that he was going to be the FCA guy, right? But what he was doing was he was saying yes to Jesus then. He was serving then. And then now when you look back, you see what has God done with his obedience? What has God done with his yes, right? And so for me, the visual side of this was I've known Trey. I knew he was the FCA guy now. I didn't get to see Trey 5 years ago, 6 years, 8 years ago, right? But what Trey was doing was he was simply doing at the Orchard what he felt like God was leading him to do. He was saying yes then, and now you fast forward and you see that he was having an impact then, and he's having an impact now. Today was tomorrow 8 years ago. And that's what this to me encapsulates is what can we do today in the everyday, in the Monday? Yeah. When you say yes to serving, when you say yes to whatever it is that you feel like God is doing, you don't know what that's going to look like in the future. You just simply give God your yes today. And sometimes just giving God your yes today is exactly what it looks like to impact tomorrow.
Well, I think that What you're really talking about is a term that I would love to see us normalize at the Orchard, and that is the idea of an informal missionary. Now, in fairness, with Carter, it's not informal at all. He's a missionary. With Trey, it's not super informal. We don't necessarily think of an FCA director as a missionary, but in essence, that's what he is. Now, with Brittany, that's 100% an informal missionary, and it's that idea that if we just look to our Sunday morning services to impact tomorrow and to impact lostness in our communities, then we're going to be very ineffective at that. You know, even if we filled up our buildings to capacity multiple times on a Sunday, we're still not moving the needle enough to truly make that impact. The power of the church has always been and always will be when followers of Jesus live as missionaries in their communities. And we've talked about this with Impact Tomorrow, that they being missions organizations, denominations, whatever, are sending missionaries all across Florida, honestly, because Florida is a growing, unreached state. South Florida, especially Orlando, Jacksonville, like these are places that have been highlighted. Let's send missionaries and church planters to these regions. Nobody's sending a missionary to Trenton. Nobody's sending a missionary to High Springs or to Branford. And what I want the Orchard to see is that's okay, because we are the missionaries that God has sent to North Central Florida. We are the ones who can do this here. And that's what we mean by taking that next step in an engagement initiative, engaging in living as an informal missionary.
Yeah. It makes me think to Paul when he's in Athens, right? And he addresses the crowds. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but basically when he's addressing this Gentile crowd of philosophers and people who are quote unquote worldly, who didn't grow up in Jerusalem and go to the temple and all that. And he basically says in there that God has established the boundaries of humans and nations and all of these things. And he has appointed the time for which these people live in these areas. And, you know, I think you can get super spiritual and think like, oh, Paul's like, that's really, really good preaching. But then you think about like God has so intended that we get to call Live Oak, Lake City, Branford home. And he's established that ability for us to live in these places at this time, to your point, and we are the ones who have the privilege to be able to reach these communities. Why? Because we know these communities the best. I think, and I tell the story, like I've been to Cuba, I've been to the Dominican Republic, I've been to Brazil, and every time I'm there, all I can think is, if only I didn't need a translator, if I could just speak the language, I feel like I could share the gospel with this person in such a profound way.
Yeah.
And I remember I think it was in Brazil, and I could never pick up on Portuguese. You know, Spanish a little bit, got a little bit of high school background there. Portuguese was just, I think this word is this, and it has no connection, right? And I remember being there, and I'm like, only I could just speak to this person, right? Because your heart beats for this person. Through the translation, you realize that they're inquisitive, they want to know, and I feel like I just can't do an adequate job in this moment to put the emotion behind it, to really speak to you in a personal way, because I'm speaking through a translator and all that stuff. And I remember being there and thinking, but I have this capability. I know the culture of where I'm from. I know how people tick. I know how they think. I know the language. I can speak to people on a personal level right where I live. And maybe that's because that's what God has intended. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with missions.
Yeah, not at all. We support missions actively.
It's just the idea that the most effective missionaries are the ones who are immersed in the culture, and we are immersed not by happenstance, but because God has so ordained it that we get to call these places home, so that, yeah, nobody's sending missionaries to our part of the world. That's okay, because we get to call it home. And we know Jesus, and that equips us to go and do the work of ministry in these small communities that are oftentimes overlooked, you know, on a grand scale, oftentimes overlooked. You know, it's just kind of like, oh, that's Podunk, and like you say all the time, they got Dollar Generals and not Targets. You know,
that's us, baby.
They're 20 minutes away from Walmart, but we get to call these places home, and that's by God's design. And who better to reach these communities than the ones who live here?
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think the big obstacle that we face here, probably in normalizing that idea, that word, I think is that there still is somewhat ingrained in our people this idea that, hey, Pastor, that's what we call you to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hurdle that we've got to somehow cross.
It's the professional Christian.
It is the professional Christian. That's what, you don't understand our life. Our life is not built around the church. Well, in reality, our life isn't built around the church either. It's around the mission that we're called to.
That's good.
And our mission is no different than yours, But
yeah, I think that's really good, that if it is the job of professional Christians, we're going to be very limited in what we can do. And that's the other part of the Impact Tomorrow idea, is that we are not looking to be limited to where we currently are as the Orchard right now. That this is really a regional vision and a regional desire to make that kind of impact. And, that is scary, I think, to some people. But the more I've talked to folks, I think that they get it. They understand that we are in a very unique part of the state, that while we all have differences in the communities, like we've already talked about, in a lot of ways, we're very similar. In that pocket of North Central Florida, very similar. Dollar stores and Friday night lights, that's us. And we want to reach those other people like us who may not have a church quite like the Orchard that is focused on reaching them in their community. And so the other part of Impact Tomorrow is, how do we grow our foundation as a church so that as we stabilize that foundation, we can reach further? Now, I don't know if you guys remember this, Eddie and Matt, maybe you do, but when I was talking to our leadership teams and our management team, passing out the books and recasting that vision, I threw some pictures up there of guys in some pretty sketchy situations with ladders, and if you're a guy, been around guys, you know what I'm talking about. Like, we will put a ladder on the sketchiest stuff so that we can reach just a little bit further.
Yeah.
I might even be guilty of that.
A guy's mantra is, I'd rather risk my life than go get a taller ladder.
That's 100%. But the foundation does limit your ability to reach further. And it feels like in a lot of ways where we've been at the Orchard is just kind of like that. Well, we don't have a bigger ladder, so let's just get as sketchy as we can, and we're risking it all. But as we grow up, I think it's important that we make sure we are investing in our foundation, not for the sake of having the best foundation anybody's ever had, but so that we are able to reach further than we could. And part of that is increasing our staffing at our locations. Part of that is increasing facilities at our locations. I talked in Lake City a few weeks ago that, I want to see us be able to have new facilities, not so that we can be like, oh, wow, look how awesome our worship experience is, but I would love to be able to host summer camp at one of our locations. We don't have the facilities to do that right now. We don't have facilities to do that. I would love to be able to host community events that bless our communities. We don't have facilities to do that. And with some of those things, growing our missions impact, growing our facilities, growing our staff, I mean, the bottom line is, like it or not, it comes down to finances and what can we do. And I believe we have a great team of people that oversee our finances to keep us healthy and accountable. But another part of Impact Tomorrow is, it's not only like a giving campaign, but part of it is giving, and that we as a church, individuals, have to step up to commit financially to support the mission of the church. So quite frankly, that financial aspect has always been a little bit of a struggle for the Orchard.
Yeah, it has been. But, it's of course, obviously, I would rather that not be a struggle. I mean, all of us would just love to have an open budget that says, hey, you got funds for whatever you want.
Blank checks.
Absolutely. But I recall that I made a comment that when we first started the Orchard, actually before we even started, but while we were contemplating all of this, and I've told the story some about how my plan was to get a job so that we could be, our salary, we'd need some kind of salary to supplement our life.
Yeah, well, since the church had no budget when you started it, it was kind of
exactly. And so I'm going to get a job, and then through a longer story I don't have time to tell, the Lord just closed that door and made it clear to Beth and I that I should not get a job, that we're going to move by faith. We're going to just trust God to supply our needs. And Beth and I talked about it, and we came up with this thought. We felt like God was saying to us, you need to learn to live by faith and trust me, and not by your bank account. And so then we quickly applied that to the orchard, because we never had any money. We never had enough money for anything.
Yeah, that's right.
But I mean, seriously,
we've always had enough to do what God's called us to do.
Exactly. And so to me, it's a matter of, okay, we're just going to trust the Lord and not our bank account. And I love what we're doing right now with some of the projects that we're looking at. We don't have the money to do them, but we're trusting that God will do it. We're living by faith. And I think that sometimes churches as a whole don't want to live by faith. They do want to see the budget coffers full. And of course, again, I would too.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with desiring to see the budget grow. But Eddie, you did a good job of putting that why underneath it. We don't want to see the budget grow so that we grow bank accounts or see our budget grow. We want to see the budget grow because that's what it's going to take to fulfill the vision and the mission that we feel like God has given us as a church. And that's often an uncomfortable conversation to have with folks, especially in a church like the Orchard. One, it's a church plant. Two, it's a multi-site church. And so I think it's almost group text syndrome when we talk about this. Like, everybody always assumes the money comes from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But just so we're entirely clear, we operate entirely off of what people who attend the Orchard give. Mm-hmm. That's what we operate off of. And we choose not to operate in a deficit if we can help it. Not saying we don't take out a loan to do construction projects or whatever, but like, we're not going in the hole every year and hoping,
Yeah, and it's just been amazing to me for nearly 18 years now that, as you said, you put it well, we've had the money to do what God wanted us to do. And it's been incredible to watch, because there's been some pretty incredible things that have happened from that first little jar of pennies, nickels, and dimes that a Sunday school class gave to me.
Yeah, that's a cool story. I think we've shared that on the podcast before. If you haven't heard it, you need to be on listen for that story, because it's a cool story. But I think for me, just kind of winding that part of the conversation down, is two of the biggest ways that people at the Orchard can engage in Impact Tomorrow is, one, choosing to live as informal missionaries, going out of their way to live that way. And then secondly, to pray about what their next step in giving looks like, and then take it. Maybe you're not giving anything right now. Just to be honest, that's a large chunk of people who attend the Orchard. So we would say, all right, pray about what it looks like to give something. Maybe you give when you can, as you can. What we would say is, all right, pray about what would it look like for you to give regularly, like as a planned gift, not just whenever there's extra money left over. Because if you're like the Parker House, it doesn't seem extra money is often left over. And then if you do give regularly, maybe take that step to give intentionally, where you set aside a percentage of your income to give first to the Lord. And we call that's where the biblical concept of tithing comes in. And then we believe that there are people who call the Orchard home, who God has blessed and gifted to even go above and beyond that, to say, yeah, I tithe, I give a percentage, but God has really blessed me, and so I want to go above that, be generous as a legacy giver. If everybody at the Orchard just took that next step, whatever that next step was, like you said, Eddie, we wouldn't have to worry about budget again. We would have more than enough to do what God has called us to do. And the point of this is not the money. The point of this is the vision and the mission. And I'm excited about that. I believe we're going to see it happen.
Can I touch on that real quick? So one of the things that you realize if you read the New Testament, and you mentioned the principle of tithing, that is a principle. It's a helpful principle. It gives you kind of a starting point. It gives you this metric for a percentage that you can kind of plan and budget for and be intentional about. When you read the New Testament, this is the heartbeat of how churches started collecting funds. It was not a building campaign. It was not the pastor getting up and saying, hey, we need X amount, da-da-da. It was people who followed Jesus, recognizing needs in their community and saying, here's what I'm willing to do about the need, right? That's what happens in the book of Acts. People were selling things and they were bringing it to the apostles, laying it at their feet and saying, hey, we recognize the need. We want to contribute to that. And collectively, we could do things about needs that individually I could not. To me, that's why Impact Tomorrow is so important, because it is an initiative, it is a vision, it is forward thinking, and it's also why it's important that people have to buy into, hey, this is not just a fancy book that's being passed out. This is representative of every one of our communities, Live Oak, Lake City, Brantford, and even other surrounding communities. This is representative of that. And this is what it looks like to recognize a need in my community and for me to do something about it. Sometimes me doing something about it looks like I make myself available as an informal missionary, right? Me doing something about it looks like investing, saying yes to serving, saying yes to joining a team, whatever that may be, right? That's one way that you can do something about a need. The second thing is, in the heart of the New Testament, it flowed from a place of generosity and not obligation. Hey, we see a need, we bring these things that belong to us, and we are relinquishing control of these things, giving it to you to then steward and manage it to help meet a need. And that's one of the ways is if you buy into this idea of we can have an impact tomorrow by what we do today.
Yeah.
It's important that you buy in, though, because if you don't recognize a need, then it's like, it's like, oh, this is just about Sunday mornings and we come and we circle up, we sing a song and we go home.
Yeah.
And that's it. But when you realize that, no, the heart of our church is not about just gathering on Sunday mornings, it's because we believe there are real needs in our community. And I'm not talking about just physical needs. We're talking about a spiritual need.
Yeah.
That there is lostness in North Central Florida. What can we do as a church to be equipped, but also to be ready to have an impact in our communities to address this need?
Yeah.
Right? What if it looks like, giving somebody something that requires some funds, right? That we buy something, but that meets a need. But the point is not meeting the need. The point is through this need, we show you that, hey, Jesus sees you and he hears you and he cares, and I get to represent him to you. Right? Like the thing is, you can strategize and you can plan, and those things are all good principles. Trust me, I'm type A. I love a good plan. I love a good strategy. But we've all been in ministry long enough that sometimes, almost in a blink, like you feel like God says, hey, this is what I want you to do. And you didn't have time to plan for that. You didn't have time to strategize about that. In this moment, it's about, am I willing to say yes and trust you?
Yeah. Or
am I willing to say no? And I think we've all lived that. What we're saying is, as a church, when those moments arise, we want to be able to say yes, because we say, hey, God has equipped us to be able to do this. We didn't necessarily see this need coming, but we want to be generous because we want to be a generous church. But we want to be able to say yes in this moment, to say, you know what, we can meet this need. We feel like God has allowed us to be the ones to step in and meet this need at this time.
And what you're referencing, Matt, is, kind of a story that I've told as I've cast a vision for Impact Tomorrow. Is my phone rings often with pastors or churches or community organizations who are looking for help, in various degrees and in various ways. And I want to be able to say yes every time. The truth is, I'm not able to say yes every time because our resources are limited. And in fairness, they're always going to be limited. We have to pick and choose how to make the best use of the resources we have. And sometimes our resources are exhausted. And I'm not just talking about dollar bills. I'm talking about like just people. And I think that that's the heart of it. We want to be able to say yes all the time. We're not talking about building a redneck Sistine chapel. We're talking about funding a missions organization, an outpost in the middle of North Central Florida. That's what we're talking about.
So I think that brings me to another word, and Matt touched on it a moment ago. Yes, generous is important, but really I heard someone say, I think they're probably right, generous is what we are more than what we do.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's true.
That is a characteristic, not an action.
Yes. I think what we can't also lose track of is the word investment. And I think that we are investing in something. And,
that's right. That's where we are as a church right now. We're in an investment phase.
Exactly. We're investing in our community. We're investing in our location. We're investing in the world. We're investing in the lives of people. And I think we have to remember that when Jesus was talking about investing, he said, don't lay up yourself treasures on this earth where moth will destroy, where thieves will steal it. But what did he say? He said, lay up your treasures in heaven. What he was saying is invest in heaven, invest in the kingdom.
Invest in the kingdom.
Exactly. Right. And I think that is so good. And for some people, I think it's a good way of looking at it, because sometimes I think, I guess it's our flesh, yes, but it's our personality, and it's reality. Sometimes we just look at somebody and we say, well, you know what, dadgummit, I got pick myself up, let them pick themselves up.
Yeah.
Which is a wrong attitude.
Yeah, bootstrap theology.
Exactly.
We pick ourselves up by our own bootstraps.
Right. But here's the thing, even for that person, what about an investment? You've got a chance to make an investment in the kingdom here. Again, it comes back to when we talk about giving, we talk about these kind of issues, we have to re-say it. We say it so much, I know people get tired of hearing it. But this is something we want for you, not from you. I think that's the bottom line.
That's good. Well, we're running out of time. So really quickly, as we wind down, the three of us are here, pastors of our 3 locations. Really quickly, what is something that you hope to see come out of this engagement initiative we're calling Impact Tomorrow? What is something you hope comes out of this for your location?
So this is an easy one for me, partly because I've been thinking about it for several months now. I think for our location in Live Oak specifically, what I hope comes out of this is this idea that we need builders. We need people who will help build a rock solid foundation that will last into the future.
That's good.
We need people who will build a foundation in kids ministry by saying yes to kids ministry. We need somebody who will be a builder for small groups and volunteer either their time as a leader or their home to meet in. Because I think that's one of the things about growing up is that we have a lot of ideas, but sometimes it's hard for systems to stick. Sometimes it's hard to develop a pipeline, so to speak. Whereas a church that's been around for 75 years, like Sunday school may be ingrained into that culture. The people who were there didn't build it. They just happen to be a byproduct of this system that's already been in place for 60 years. And so, that's a different setting, because in that setting, maybe you need to revamp it. You need to remind people why it's important, whatever. I think for where we're at, specifically in Live Oak, we need people who are builders, who are willing to stick it out when things aren't perfect. The ones who are going to help solidify the foundation, who are going to help solidify the system so that 20 years from now, there is a rock solid foundation for small groups or kids ministry volunteers or you name it. But we need the people now to help build that. And I think that's part of growing up.
That's good.
It's something that we do, right? We have these things in place, but systems take some time. You got to iron it out. You got to figure out what works. You got to figure out, you got to solidify it, so to speak. And I just think that Impact Tomorrow gives us a chance to, number one, remind people of what's at stake. Like what we do today matters. Number two, it also allows them to see what opportunities that they have to step into different roles or different ways that they can have an impact tomorrow by what they do today. But I think it's not just, hey, let's just come and be a part, because it can be frustrating when you're involved in the nitty gritty and trying to help solidify. It can be frustrating because things aren't perfect and things need ironing out and we need to tweak it or whatever. I think right now, though, that's what we need the people who are builders, who are willing to kind of stick through and be patient through some of that as they say yes. And they just understand that you're part of the building process, and sometimes things aren't going to be as smooth as they may be 5 years from now. But you're part of that process so that the person who comes in 5 years will be able to jump in and they don't have to be part of the building process because the solid foundation has already been laid.
Yeah, that's good. I like that idea of builders. I think that's good. What about you, Eddie? What are you looking for in Branford?
I'm probably not nearly as articulate as Matt just was, but simply put, I think I'm looking for an army. I think it has some units, it has some platoons here and there, but I'm looking for an army. After all, anytime you're in any kind of battle, the more people you have engaged, the better. And I think right now, what I'm looking for is more people engaged, more people who are those missionaries we're talking about, those ordinary missionaries, and people who have a real desire to not just come to church, but to impact the community. I think we got a lot of people who want to come to church, but I think more than any, I'm getting restless, and maybe it's an age thing, but I'm getting restless to see us really want to impact the community.
That's
not
awesome.
Just come to church.
Yeah, I like that. I think for me, and I'm going to go back to the word you brought up a minute ago, Eddie, is I want to see investment come out of the Lake City location. And what I mean is I want to see people grow so burdened, convicted, passionate, whatever you want to say, about the mission that they are willing to invest in it. Yes, I mean financially, as part of that, but more than that they're willing to invest their time, they're willing to invest their energy, they're willing to invest a weekend that they could have been at Disney World or the ball field because they see that this matters, and they're willing to invest in the kingdom through what they do today because they are so convinced of what it's going to become tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's really well put, that we don't talk of investment just as money, because an army is invested. Builders are invested with more than just the money. Good.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, you guys are going to get to hear a lot more about Impact tomorrow in the days and weeks and months ahead. And in fact, here shortly, we are going to be asking you to step up to the plate and to make a commitment, to commit yourself to taking your next step in impacting tomorrow. And so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about what is coming from that. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm excited about what the future holds for the Orchard.
Yeah, including the next edition.
Yeah, including the next edition. So, all right. Well, we hope you're back here with us next week for our next edition of Let's Talk About That.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk About That. We hope it encouraged and challenged you as we continue to grow on this journey of faith and embrace community together. If you have any questions, thoughts, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us through our social media channels or visit our website to stay connected. Your support is what makes this podcast impactful. If you found today's discussion meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, share the episode with a friend, and leave a review. Your engagement helps us spread the message and connect with others who can be encouraged through these conversations. Until next time, we hope this episode inspired you to live out your faith this week. Keep the conversations alive, and remember, we're all on this journey together.